400 rejections from job?
Well, 454. I remember counting them. 454 rejection letters. And today, boy, you get nothing from companies. But back then, they had to type out every letter because there wasn't computers back in 1982, right? So they typed them out and had to personally sign them and send them.
So thank you for joining me, Don, today. And you can tell us about yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I first appreciate the opportunity to be on and talk to your audience today because I think finance is such an important piece. So I'm the guy who had, in 1982, getting out of college, 454 rejection letters. And I ended up joining the U.S. military because people weren't hiring in 1982. It was a recession. And oddly enough, when I retired, I thought it was going to be 4 years. I retired 27 years later. And we were in the middle of another recession. So I learned quickly how to get jobs or at least work through the process. But a big part of that was my finances during that process of taking responsibility for what I was earning and what the expenses were and building a retirement. So now here I am 64 and pretty well financially set and doing what I love, which is podcast guesting, which is communicating, which is training, which is coaching, and really helping people really get to where their goals are. Because too often, I heard it said this morning in a podcast, you got two choices. You can either intentionally work toward a goal, or you can just randomly approach a goal that you have no idea what it is. And I'm much more in the first one.
Sounds great. So like when you retired, how old you were?
Well, so I retired from the military in, 2009. So I was 50. And then I left my first corporate job 9 years later. So I was 59. But I now own my own company and do leadership training and coaching. So I haven't officially fully retired. I've probably half retired or maybe a quarter retired. Right? I'm probably working 3/4 time.
And how many years you served the military?
27. Again, I got in just to do 4 years to get some experience because of the recession of 1982, and I just absolutely loved it. The opportunities I got to work on projects, and I remember coming home from the recruiter the first night, and my wife said, well, if we can go to Germany, I would agree that we should join. And I said, well, you can't go to Germany unless you do join. And you can't tell the government what to do. So let's join and try it out. And at the end of the 3 years or 2.5 years, 3.5 years, I got assigned from Upper Michigan to Wyoming. And I was like, we're not getting closer to Germany. And then 2 years later, we got 30-day notice to move to Germany. And we were able to work a deal with the Air Force for 60 days, but no more. And we spent 4 years in Germany and just loved it. So we just got opportunity after opportunity to see the world and to do really neat projects. And our kids grew up really enriched. It was just a fantastic experience.
So you got like 400 rejections from job?
Well, 454. I remember counting them. 454 rejection letters. And today, boy, you get nothing from companies. But back then, they had to type out every letter because there wasn't computers back in 1982, right? So they typed them out and had to personally sign them and send them. Yeah, that was a stack sitting in the corner that day.
So you were applying for like what kind of job? It was
So I was I was an environmental engineer, civil and environmental engineer degree, but really the environmental side. So I was talking to a lot of states and a lot of companies working on various environmental projects, environmental programs around the United States. Yeah. So it could be, designing wastewater treatment plants or water plants or managing hazardous waste or whatever.
So at that recession time, you end up getting job in like US military.
Okay. And a lot of people wonder how that fit me, but I got to go to K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I got to. They were doing a addition and alteration to their wastewater treatment plant, which was right up my alley. So I got to be the project engineer on that, reviewing the contractor's design, and then we had a groundwater contamination problem. So I got to work with the United States Geological Survey on doing the groundwater survey and track that contamination down. And I got to manage the hazardous waste um, facility. So everything just fit perfectly.
Mm. So how you like so I would say like maybe you retired I would say like you were having maybe like 10 years ago or 15 years ago you were having a good amount of money so that you can live on your own, that you don't have to worry much about like paychecks and all, right?
So, um, so that's an interesting question. So my wife and I always, both of our parents taught us about a budget. So early on we budgeted, and then we started getting into investing. So we wanted to save and invest, right, to leverage the power of compounding. So by the time I retired in 2009, I was not in from the military. I was not in a position to retire completely, but we were on the path, and it worked out very well. Continuing to invest, continuing by having both my military retirement and a corporate job, we were able to save at one point 40% of our salary, and that really
Wow.
compounded through the last 10 years, 15 years, and has really done well.
So probably I would say maybe $500,000 that time.
Probably somewhere in that area. In
Yeah, right.
2009, yeah.
Yeah, right. And probably 2009, $500,000 today, if you'll take it, then it would be, I would say, 1.5 million on an average.
Yeah, I'm not going to get in the detail, but yeah, above that.
No.
Yeah. You know,
So,
we're definitely in the top 1%.
okay.
I
It's
think
fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I got into, you know, initially back in 1986, 83, I got into Dean Witter, which was owned by Sears, and they had a dividend growth mutual fund. And then we moved into First Command, which had a high load on it, which was a mistake we made, but it got us into the discipline of savings. And then in 2010, I started managing all my own money, my own investments, and we're basically in the SPY. It's the index for the SP 500. We're in the QQQ, which is the index for the Nasdaq. We ended up buying Berkshire Hathaway, which has been very nice. And then I've got about 5 to 8% depending in individual stocks. I really enjoy the analysis of companies and analysis of their finances and figuring out which stocks to own. Apple has done very well for me. Nvidia is doing really well for me right now. So you have a bunch of really big winners and you have a bunch that are steady performers.
So at what was your age when you started like investing? In 20s?
Let's see, it was 83, so I was about 24, 25. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Then you started really early, because nowadays...
In fact, you could even go earlier than that. My wife and I got married in 82, and she immediately started a 401k. Now that was putting money in a savings account, right? But it was a year or two later when we actually started investing in a mutual fund.
So when you started investing, like how you divided your, I would say like the whole corpus?
I'm not understanding the question. Say again.
So like, I mean to say like when you were investing, how you divided the money, like suppose like people do like, okay, 20% I will do in ETF and 60% okay. I will do in bond. Yeah.
So everything in the very beginning was in one mutual fund. So with Dean Witter, it was the dividend growth, right? We weren't investing that much. It was, $25, $50 a month, something like that. As we started putting more and more, it wasn't until 2010 when I took it over myself that we really started diversifying. And people will argue with me today, right? The SPY, the QQQ, even they pretty much, the big movers of both of those are pretty much the same stocks. So am I investing in the same thing, just a different vehicle? Berkshire Hathaway is a little bit different because they're companies that Warren Buffett owns or is a big shareholder in. But and some of them are the same, like Coke. He's big in Coke. He's big in Apple. and so are the others. So I've got a lot of the same stocks, but I moved it all to ETFs in 2010. I didn't like
Oh,
the fact of when uh, when the market took a downturn, I had to send in a request, and then a couple days later, they would finally cash me out and send me a check. Right, could take 2 weeks to get my money. With an exchange traded fund, I could, go on right now, just like trading a stock, and say I want to sell that. Boom, sold. It's in my account. I can take the money. So I
right.
protect myself from downside in some respects. I've tried to be not a Jim Cramer talks about being a buy and hold, which is not good, but a buy and homework. And you should always be researching where your stocks are and what's happening. And I'm probably not as active as I should be on selling. I hold. I'm a Motley Fool follower as well, and they talk about some stocks they've ridden down 95%. From 100 down to $5, and I don't like that idea. But I can't say after the 2021 market turn down that I didn't ride some down significantly. I got busy with other things in my work, and I didn't. I took my eyes off it. So I'm trying to build that discipline back of watching them every week.
So how many ETFs normally people should like keep? Like because sometimes people they confuse, right? Like because there are a bunch of ETFs in the market.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the Motley Fool, which is you should have about 15, and then build from there. Maybe add a one or two every year, but you don't want to get so many that you become your own mutual fund or your own ETF, right? So that pretty soon you start looking just like everybody else, and it becomes too hard to track them. I want to say I'm probably about 20 right now. I'd have to look. I'm probably about 20. And I was just looking the other night at which ones have returned from the 2021 downturn and which ones haven't. And what I got big in, let's see, in 2007, 2006, I learned about um, the price and volume that makes up the charts for a stock price, stock volume, and over time, and really understanding how stocks move. 50% they move with the sector. So the stock made itself may not be working well, but the sector is working well. So you got to understand what that is, um, and the market itself. So probably the one I'm really turning to right now is Investors Business Daily. I like their clear metrics. I like their chart analysis. So you get the fundamentals and you get the technicals, and you can make decisions pretty quick. That makes sense.
Yeah, I understand.
Mhm.
So probably what do you suggest? Like maybe suppose today if I have to invest 10 grand, then should I put like 20% maybe in normal stocks, and maybe like I would say, I don't know, 60% maybe in ETF, and rest all other in maybe bonds and all. So is that a like good distribution?
So if you're young enough, I don't think you really need bonds. Just look, 1, 2, 3. I had exactly 20 stocks. so, um, so a couple different caveats to that. First, um, I would still put the majority, 80%. And Jim Cramer talks about this. I was just listening to this morning. 80% should be in a mutual fund or an ETF, following a market like an S&P 500. And not Jim Buffett, Warren Buffett made a comment about this. He made a bet against active mutual fund managers and said, you invest for 10 years, whatever you want. We have X amount of money. You invest in whatever mutual fund you want to put it in. I'll invest in the S&P 500 and we'll see who wins. And at the 9-year point, they canceled the bet because S&P 500 was so far ahead that there was no way the active managers could catch up. So that's the power of the S&P 500, right? Even though you've got it driven by, they call it the Magnificent Seven today, Microsoft, Apple, Google, all those. Even Tesla's in there. The Tesla's turned down. It's dropped almost half this year. Um, it's just driven a lot by that, and you've got a lot of losers in there. But overall, it's still performing really well. So 80% of your money should be in something like that with an S&P 500. Maybe if you're younger, into the Nasdaq, which is the growth stocks, the technology stocks, stuff like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And then you take about 20%, and you could get into some other, um, like with stocks. But then you got to worry about the diversification, right? You can't put them all in technology, right?
Mhm.
The Magnificent Seven is great, but they're all kind of the same. Apple, Microsoft, Google, they're all kind of the same type of stock. Same, they move together. So you got to be careful. Um, so diversify across that. Some medical, some technology, some like Starbucks, something a consumer discretionary. It's probably a
Mhm.
slower growth, but it's good and steady.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, but so in my 80%, actually 85%, that's 95% that's in ETFs. I'm about 10% in the S&P 500, 10% in Berkshire, about 10% in the Nasdaq. So I've got the diversification across.
Okay, so you have, I would say, like equal distribution in all the ETFs.
Mhm. Well, not all the ETFs, but about five different ETFs. I have one that's small business, the IWM, which is small caps, and then the IWR, which is the mid caps. So I'm trying to
Hmm.
capture that. I've got a little bit in the emerging markets, but the emerging markets just have not been performing anywhere in 15
Mm.
years. If you
Right.
look back to 2010, they're about the same level today as they were then. So I have a hard time putting my money into that when they haven't shown any inclination to rise. And if you look at the American stock market versus other countries, either the European or even the second world, they're just not.
Mm.
We're far ahead of them. So I'm keeping most of my money in America.
Hmm. So, so what means, I would say, like, what are the mistakes you did or one shouldn't do, like when putting the money in the stock market?
So I think it's a mistake to put it in and forget it. There's a lot of people I know who do that. They just put it in and forget it and let it grow to whatever it's going to grow. I'm I'm of the mindset that you should, because I'm a C personality in the DISC assessment, which is I'm very analytical. I'm compliant, so I like spreadsheets. So I like to have a plan. So I went through and figured out. So this would be a mistake, not estimating how much you need to have when you retire. Right? I'm going to be so on say I'm 25. I'm going to retire at 65, which is kind of a standard. Some people want to retire before that, but you can figure it out. So, how much, what standard of living do I want to have then? What's the conditions around you, right? Are you going to have your cars paid off, the house paid off? How much debt are you going to have? You're going to have school loans. How much money do you need to make between now and then? How much do you need to invest? What's a good annual growth rate? A lot of times it's 10%. Some people argue it's 8% today, but I've still been arguing achieving about 10%. Um, so estimating what you're going to have when you retire, and then periodically assessing that. Every couple of years, are you on track? Have the because power of compounding, right? The less you make in the beginning years will have an impact down the road. The more you make in the beginning years will have an impact down the road. So you never know what's going to happen, right? Think back to 1999 with the technology bust, the bubble burst, and, and technology went down 50% or more. That was just about the time I had been saving money for my kids' college, and I wasn't paying attention to it. I was busy with work, and the market dropped 50% just about the time my kids needed that money for college. That was a big
Oh,
mistake. That was a big mistake,
and
right?
then what you did?
Well, I had to put in other money out of my savings to make the gap.
I would say like emergency fund.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't even doing so emergency fund. I had to pull it out of other investments. It wasn't even the emergency fund. I didn't have that much in the
Mm.
emergency fund. So, and part
Mm.
of it, my son had to get through FAFSA, the federal student aid. He had to go for some more loans, and then we helped him pay those off. So So that
Mm.
was a big mistake, right? Not paying attention. And when I got within that 5 years and the market started turning down, I should have said, time to get that money out of there. And it happened again in for my next son. And then I was smart enough with my daughter to say, fool me twice, don't fool me three times. Yep.
So it was a ETF or it was a individual stocks?
Those were mutual funds.
Oh,
That was when I was
uh,
invested in mutual funds.
which mutual fund?
I don't even remember. Fidelity Destiny 2, I think.
Okay, so it was like concentrated to technology or maybe like energy
No,
sector.
it was pretty well diversified. Mm.
I'm really shocked because like like people nowadays, like most of the financial expert, they'll say you, hey, put in this mutual fund and forget it, and it will grow slowly and gradually, right?
And if you have enough time, it will. But there comes a point, like when you're 65 and you're thinking you need some of that money over the next 5 years, you need to pull that money out. The beautiful thing about the stock market is it goes down. So I love this. The Motley Fool told me this at one point, and I started going back and analyzing. The market goes down 10% at least once a year. It goes down
Mm.
20% every 2 to 3 years. It goes down 30% every 3 to 5 years. And
Oh.
every 10 years or so, it's going to go down every about 50%. And sure enough, you go back to 2009, it went down 40%. You go back to 1999, it went down 40%. Go back to 1987, it took a huge drop. So it's just the market runs in cycles. So to think that it's always going to go up and never come down is a misnomer. And you don't want to necessarily sell out every time it starts dropping, because you don't know when it starts dropping how far is it going to drop, right? You don't know how far it goes until it gets there. So just knowing that that's going to happen and not panicking. Most people think about 2009. I watched I was retiring from the military and my dad had passed away in 2006. My mother had a stroke in 2009. So we were moving her to Texas. And I started watching as I was fixing up her house to sell it. I was watching people in Florida, and they were walking away from their house because their mutual funds and stuff had dropped so much that they didn't think they could afford the payments. But after
Oh.
about another 4 years, the house was back to the same appreciation it was before 2009 dropped. So the market goes down, price of real estate goes down, comes up, right? It's just, there's cycles there. And you've got to be aware of those and not panic. So it's the people who panic that lose. People who sell at the bottom and buy at the top is who lose money. So you got to be careful.
Mm.
You got to be careful. Now, there are some tools you can use like covered calls and covered puts to try to hedge that. Some people don't like those because if you put a covered call on it, I don't want to get too detailed here, but right. So your stock is going up and it starts turning down. You put a covered call on it, so you're making money on the covered
Mhm,
call as
mhm,
the market goes down. But if the market
mhm,
turns and
mhm.
goes back up, now you're losing money on the covered call. So, but it's about there's a whole art and science of that, and that's really for the people who have enough time to and understanding to do that. I got into that at one point, and he just didn't have enough time, so I backed out of it.
Mm. So if someone has to retire, maybe like I would say in 10 to 15 years, then how much money a person need?
How much do they need? So it's estimated, and you probably know this. Um, you should take out 4% of what you. So if you have $1,000,000, take out 4%, which is 40,000, and
Mm.
and that's what you have to live on, and then your investment should last forever. Some people now say 5%, so 50,000. So if your standard of living requires you based upon, do you have a house payment, do you have a car payment, what's your food budget, what's your utility budget, what's your gas budget, what's your travel budget, figure out budget's so important. Once you figure out all those expenses, say I need $100,000, right? Then at 5%, I need $2 million in savings to yield me $100,000. And then you have to figure out the tax piece in there. So that depends on,
Mm,
are you invested in like a traditional IRA where you have to pay taxes, or are you invested in a Roth IRA where you've already paid the taxes, right? So,
mm,
but that's a good estimate. Now, and that's why I say some people, they just have no idea what their expenses are going to be, and they just put, you know, 5% or 7% or 10% in savings and have no idea how that's going to come out. So that's going to totally drive what your standard of living is. So you either get to pick your standard of living and try to save enough to get there, or you save and that determines your standard of living. But too many people have undersaved, because what is it? 50% of Americans have less than $50,000 saved when they hit retirement. So you're going to totally depend on Social Security, which is probably going to be 30, 40,000. If you have 50,000, isn't going to give you anything for retirement. So you now are living on 30 or 40,000. And today, most people are having a mortgage as they go into retirement. So you got to pay that $1,500, $2,000 a month. So that's 18 to 20,000, 18 to 24,000 out of your 35,000. That's way too
mhm.
much. So,
Right.
but you can get all this information, right? What's the typical percent of my budget? Should be food, should be housing, should be cars, should be travel. You can make those estimates.
That's right. And also, like the number which you are telling, it does take care of the inflation.
The number, you got to figure inflation into it.
Right.
Yeah. So I took all my, I remember working a spreadsheet in 2008 before I retired from the military. And I predicted, this is how much I have. This is what should go up at 10% a year. And then here's my expenses. Let's take those at 3% a year. And I looked at my kids' college and I said, I'm going to make that at 8% per year. That probably undershot it. Should have been higher. But I just picked a number, 8%. Because the state of Ohio had mandated that tuition cannot go up higher than 8% a year. So I said, I'll use 8%. So I predicted it. And I worked out my budget to how much I need to cover the kids' college, how much I need to invest to retire at this level, at this standard of living, to cover these expenses. And it's worked out pretty accurate, within a range of error. But as I adjusted every couple of years coming through it, it worked out pretty good.
Mm. So basically, like you did all the math, like after retirement, and then you also like did the same thing, and you're like, okay, so what I did now, it's working. So it's basically kind of, I would say, fully proved formula that if you do, on the Excel spreadsheet, and if you'll go forward like that, then it's gonna work out. Like, because some people, they think, oh, I'm doing all these things, but you never know what will happen in future, right?
There's a lot of people who are, because of the unknown, they won't make those assumptions, right? I have no idea how much the market's going to go up in the next 10 years or 20.
Right. Correct.
Right?
I agree.
And you
Yeah.
don't. You never know. But if you go back and look at the last 100 years, it averages about 10% a year. It'll be some down, it'll be some up, but it averages about 10%. So you can use that number. Inflation, you have no idea, right? Look, now it's about 6%, but it's been 3% for decades. So 3% was a good number for a while. Now you got to, because it's 6% now, you got to tweak it a little bit, set a little bit more aside for the increase in expenses, and project those a little bit higher. But
So probably if I did a good money, maybe I would say in 15 years, then should I be outperforming S&P 500?
I don't think it's that hard to beat it. I've been beating it for 15 years since I took it over.
Okay. So like with
I've
NASDAQ?
got 10% in the NASDAQ, and it's higher than the S&P. I've got 10% in Berkshire Hathaway. That's outperforming the S&P 500. It's only dropped a little bit because as I reached 65, I bought a few more bonds. My financial advisor recommended I buy bonds, and I've been pushing that off. I was listening to Jim Cramer this morning on a podcast, his call from last night, his TV show from last night, and it's a recorded training, but he talks about people get into bonds way too early because I'm 65. I'm hoping to have another 20 years, right? So
Yeah, right.
if I move fully into bonds at making 4% a year, and then I'm going to try to pull out 4 or 5%, then yeah, it should still work out financially, and it does reduce the risk, but I really cap my upside. So there's how much risk do you want to take, right? Do you want to try to achieve higher returns so you can give more to your kids when you die? Or do you want to take less risk, be more in bonds, so you reduce the downside, but I cap my upside? So it's all decisions that are individual. That's why financial advisors are so valuable, because they help you walk through those decisions.
And what do you think about dividend investing? Like a lot of people, they are fan of dividend investing.
I think it's important. I don't invest for the dividends, but I certainly earn the 2 to 3% dividend and invest it back in, buy more shares. Yeah, definitely. So take this example last year. I think the NASDAQ by itself was up like 42%. If you took consideration with a QQQ, which is the index following the NASDAQ, and you got the dividends, it worked out to about 49%. So that's like 6 to 8% more that you earned. If you invested that back in, bought more shares, now that's compounding growing forward. So it just makes sense to do that. You got the money in there. When you get old enough, right, and you don't have enough money that's coming in and you have to take money out, then you can take the dividends and just pull those off the top and live off the dividends and keep the principal the same. Or you can reduce the amount of principal you have to pull out. So it's a good thing in retirement for sure, depending on where you're at. But again, that's the hard part. Everybody's going to be a little bit different, right? So what's your situation? I've got a military retirement and VA disability. So I'm not just totally dependent on what I have in savings. So it depends on where you're at.
Mm-hmm. So what you will recommend, like dividend investing versus like normal investing where we get just a growth on the ETFs?
I'm not a financial advisor. I can't recommend. Like I said, for me, I did not invest just for the dividends. Did I take advantage of the dividends? Yes. But I'm not a financial advisor, fiduciary, or anything. I can't recommend.
No, I was just like kind of advice. I know it's not.
Yeah. So be careful. Yeah. I think it's good to have stocks in your portfolio, even in a mutual fund or an ETF that have a dividend, and you're getting dividend payments from that. I think that's very important because it helps you to outperform the index itself. So, example, Berkshire Hathaway, they don't pay dividends, right? Now he's sitting on $200 billion of cash right now, looking for the next deal. If he just took that and invested it in the S&P 500, think about what he'd be earning, right? But he's just sitting in cash. I'm sure somehow he's making money on it, but but he's never invested because he says I can make more money in what I invest in than by giving you dividends. I can make you more money by taking that money in cash and investing it than I can in giving you dividends. And for many, many years, he was right. It's probably still true because at some point he's going to invest that $200 billion in something that's really going to be good.
I don't have Berkshire Hathaway, but now I'm planning to buy it.
Yeah. So I bought it when he did a stock split with the B shares. I think the B share was like $3,500. He split it when he bought Burlington Northern, and it went down to like $82 a share, and that's when we started buying it. It's done very well. I mean, this year, as of a couple weeks ago, it was up. The S&P 500 was up like 6.5% for the year. It was up like 13 or 14% for the year. Now it's come down a little bit the last couple of weeks. Again, the cycle, right? So I mean,
Actually, I
look at Nvidia stock. It dropped $100 in the last week.
yeah, right. Oh my God.
Yeah, but it's up. It was up like 80% for the year, and this is beginning of March. So it's okay. It's down $100. Went from 400 to 900, down 100. So it's still up like 5%, something like that.
Right.
It's taking a breath. My wife, it drives my wife crazy when I talk about the stock market or a stock like a human, right? It's taking a breath. It's breathing. It's relaxing, right? It's not a person. It's not a personality. But anyway.
So I'm investing like more in, I would say, Nasdaq 100 because that gives a good return, and I have like reduced the monthly investment in S&P 500 because I just wanted to outperform S&P 500. So that's my strategy currently. But I would definitely go to Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah, and you're fairly young, right? I'm guessing 35.
30, yeah, 30.
Yeah,
30.
30. Yeah. So you're taking the risk, investing in more technology stocks. If it drops down, you have more time to recover, which is a good thing. Jim Cramer and others recommend that younger people take more risk.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
So that's what that's what I'm doing. Like, and I don't know, like when I see like on the websites, suppose a Vanguard and all, they show that in 10 years you're gonna probably get 16% or maybe 15% of return on this Nasdaq 100. But I'm not sure, like in long term, maybe like in 10 years is fine, but maybe in 20 years it will not be the same, right?
Yeah, it's a hard one to project, right? What has it been doing over the past years?
I agree.
Just going to Google real quick. Performance. Would you say Nasdaq 100?
Yeah.
Is that the Q? Yeah, that's the QQQ, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's been a nice return.
So at what age you got your first million?
I'm not going to get that specific.
No, I would say like maybe like when you were 40 years old or maybe 45 years old or 50 years old.
I was in my 50s.
Okay. 50s. Yeah. Oh, that's pretty good. Like you got millions in your 50s because it's not that easy for a lot of people to achieve even half of the million, not even million.
The point there is planning. Working your way up in your budget. Always create a budget when you come out of college or you come out of high school. Create a budget. Build an emergency fund. I love Dave Ramsey's 7 baby steps. Build the emergency fund so that if things happen, you have money, and then start. Maybe it's $100. Maybe it's only 0.5% of your money you are putting in investing, and then over time, every time you get a pay raise or a promotion, you increase that to 1%, 1.5%, 2%, and you're trying to get to 15%. If you're making enough money and you can do that, get to 15% quickly. There's a great tale. Somebody who invested $100 a month from age 25 to 35, and you compound that out to 65, will have the same amount of money as somebody who invested $300 a month from age 35 to 55 when they get to 65. So that person started later, saved 3 times as much for twice as long. And the power of compounding didn't work for him because the other guy with $100 a month for 10 years made just as much. So the earlier you can start and leave it alone, the better. There's too many people who save money in an IRA and then they pull it out.
I got it.
And you pay a lot of penalties.
So you're telling like even if the return is less in the long term, but since you have invested a lot of money, so even if the less return will also give you a good money.
The power of compounding is amazing. Somebody said it's the 8th wonder of the world.
Yeah, I agree. And you have already seen in your life because we have obviously not seen it. So, but when we meet people like you, like, it's a proof.
Yeah, the hard part today is, and I kind of was that way, and I think the young generation is this way. We want the same things our parents have, but we want it now. right?
Mm.
So when I remember my dad was probably, I'm guessing, my dad was probably making, he was a university professor making 25,000, something like that, when I graduated college. I got a job making 13,000. I wanted that 3-bedroom house, the 2 cars. I wanted all the things that my dad had. Well, if you go back to when my dad was 25, he was making a whole lot less money. He had really used cars. He might have 1 car. Didn't have he was living with his parents, right? So it's neat that we want our kids to have what we have, but it's almost unrealistic because they don't have the money to pay for it, which is why kids are still on the parents' bankrolls the kids are 25, 30, 35. And at some point the kids need to go through and appreciate, just like I did, right? I never asked my dad for payment after I got in the military and started growing. Was I making a lot of money as a lieutenant? No. But we managed our budget so that we lived within our means, and we started saving right away. So we did a lot of picnics, right? You go to the store, you buy some meat and cheese, and you go up to the lake and you hang out. You don't go out to dinner every night. You don't do these. I joined Booz Allen Hamilton, and I was at it was 2012. We were coming up on our 30-year anniversary, and my wife and I finally had enough money to go to Jamaica for an anniversary trip.
Oh,
And then somebody else, one of the kids there, got married. And what did they do for their honeymoon? They went to Jamaica, same place we went. They probably spent more than we did. Like, how in the world did you afford that? I'm not trying to be judgmental. If you had the money, great. But if you borrow that money to have that, you're going to be paying that off for years. So living within your means. My wife and I went snow skiing in northern Wisconsin for our honeymoon, and we had the cash.
thank you so much for coming and giving us such a valuable information.
Yeah.
And
I
I
hope
hope
that helps somebody.
yeah, obviously that would definitely help to the audience, and they would be able to save, and they'll be able to understand the value of investing as well.